My uncle did not pay me money for working in his company, and then he kicked me out, accusing me of theft. My name's Kevin, I'm 28, and for the last few years, I've been stuck in what feels like the world's most frustrating dead-end job. Except it's not just any job, it's the family business. You'd think that would make it better, or at least give me some kind of security, but honestly, it's made everything worse. The company is a mid-sized food delivery service based out of Indianapolis. My uncle Greg started it back in 2003 with a single van and a dream. You've probably never heard of it unless you live in central Indiana, but locally it's kind of a big deal. They deliver to hospitals, schools, even some high-end restaurants, and they've grown a lot in the past 2 decades. My dad never got involved, but Greg's always been the loud, charismatic one in the family, and he roped me in right after I graduated college. At the time, I thought I was getting a seat at the table. I had a degree in business analytics and a ton of ideas about how to make things more efficient. Uncle Greg brought me in under the vague title of customer service manager, which sounds about as exciting as watching bread rise, but I figured I'd prove myself and move up. And in a way, I did. I built them a whole CRM system from scratch. Not some slapped-together spreadsheet, but an actual platform that tracked customer orders, optimized routes, sent out automated feedback requests, the works. I also audited our supplier contracts, cut down waste, and brought in some software to streamline inventory management. Within a year, profits were up by 40%. 40%. But did I get a promotion? A raise? A bonus? Nope. Nothing. Not even a formal contract. I still don't have one, by the way. I'm not technically on payroll. Greg pays me under the table through one of the family holding accounts, so I can't even prove half of this work if I needed to. It's all just helping out around the business, like I'm some high school kid mowing lawns for gas money. And the hours? 70 hours a week, easy. I start answering customer emails at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm usually still sorting data or dealing with angry drivers at 10 p.m. There's no HR, no overtime, no sick days. It's all just, let's keep it in the family, which is code for don't complain or you're being ungrateful. What kills me is that Greg acts like he's doing me a favor. Every time I try to bring up my role or what I've done for the company, he brushes it off like I'm just some kid who doesn't know how good he has it. You've got a roof over your head, a job you didn't have to interview for, and your name's on the inside, he'll say, as if nepotism is some kind of gift when you're the one breaking your back. It wasn't just the CRM system either. I literally saved the business last year when one of our biggest clients threatened to walk because of repeated delivery issues. I restructured the whole dispatching system. Took me 3 weekends of zero sleep and more caffeine than I care to admit. They stayed, and they increased their contract. And Greg still had the nerve to tell people at our company barbecue that we all pitched in to get it done. There is no we. It's just me doing the actual work, and Greg taking the credit while bragging to the rest of the family that he's mentoring me. He tells everyone he's grooming me to take over the business someday, but he never puts anything in writing. Every time I ask for clarity, he just says, "You're still young," or "Let's see how things go." The thing is, I've tried to leave. I've applied to jobs outside the family. Some pretty good ones, too. But the problem is, I don't have a proper title or contract. All my work is under the radar. My resume looks like I've been sitting still for years. And when I ask Greg for a letter of recommendation, he laughs it off and says I'm too valuable to lose. It's like being trapped in a job where you're doing the work of 5 people, but to the outside world, you're just a glorified assistant. The worst part? My cousins think I've got it made. They think I'm some spoiled business heir who's going to inherit the company. Meanwhile, they're out living their lives, traveling, building careers, getting married. And I'm still waking up every day to play unpaid IT guy, logistics coordinator, customer service rep, and data analyst all rolled into one. Some days, I think maybe it's my fault. That maybe I let it happen by not pushing back harder. But then I remember those first few months, how excited I was, how much energy I had, how I believed I was building something for the future. And now, I'm just tired and stuck, and I don't even know how to get out. A few months after our most recent quarterly meeting, one where I once again sat quietly in the background while Greg rattled off growth stats that only existed because of systems I built, I started hearing whispers from a couple of our suppliers. One of them, a guy named Mike who runs distribution for a big packaging company out in Ohio, mentioned something weird in passing during a call. He said, "So is Luca going to start attending these meetings too? Or is Greg just parking the shares with him?" I remember just going quiet. I don't even think I responded right away. My brain kind of short-circuited. I asked him to clarify, as casually as I could, and Mike chuckled like it was common knowledge. "Oh yeah," he said. "Greg mentioned he's transferring nearly half the company to his kid, for future-proofing. Kid's living out in Vegas now, right? Some marketing school or something. Luca, 19 years old, never worked a day in his life. Last I heard, he was going to UNLV and posting shirtless gym selfies on Instagram with captions like grind mode and trust the hustle. The kid once tried to Venmo me for beer money after crashing one of our 4th of July BBQs. That's who Greg handed 49% of the business to. I sat at my desk for a full hour after that call, just staring at the spreadsheet I'd been working on. I wasn't even mad at first, just numb. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that Greg had been stringing me along for 5 years, talking about how we were building something together, how he saw me as the future of the company. All that, your family, we stick together garbage. Meanwhile, he was drawing up paperwork to give nearly half the business to a kid whose biggest life accomplishment was flipping a bottle cap into a cup from across the room and calling it a skill. The next day I confronted him. I waited until the office cleared out. Just Greg and me in that cluttered back room he calls his executive office, which is really just a glorified storage closet with an old leather chair and a mini fridge stocked with warm Dr. Peppers. I walked in with the calmest voice I could manage and said, "Hey, I heard something weird from one of the vendors. He said Luca owns part of the company now?" Greg didn't even flinch. He looked up from his phone, gave me this practiced little smirk, and said, "Oh yeah, we're doing some restructuring. You know, for tax reasons. Estate planning stuff. Don't worry about it." I asked him how much. He tried to dodge, said it was complicated. I pressed. He finally said, "We gave him a 49% stake." Gave. I felt this sharp, cold pressure behind my eyes. Not just anger, but something worse, betrayal mixed with humiliation. I asked him point blank, why wasn't I even considered? Greg leaned back in his chair like he was about to lecture me on life. "Come on, Kev. You're already part of this. You've got skin in the game. But Luca, he's blood. He's my kid. I've got to think about his future too." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I couldn't believe it was actually happening. "Greg, I've worked 70-hour weeks for 5 years. I built the systems that made us profitable. I saved your ass more than once. And you're telling me I'm not blood?" He gave me that condescending look he saves for people who challenge him. "Your family, Kev. Don't be greedy." Greedy. That word hit me like a slap. After everything I'd done, the hours I gave up, the years I sacrificed, the relationships that fell apart because I was too busy fixing his messes, he had the audacity to call me greedy for asking why the hell his son, who has contributed absolutely nothing, now owns nearly half the company I've been breaking my back to help build. I asked if I was ever going to see equity. He shrugged. "We'll talk about it down the line." I asked about a raise. He shook his head. "Tight budget right now. Besides, you know we don't treat you like an employee. You're one of us." One of us. I walked out of that office without saying another word. My hands were shaking. I didn't even clock out. Just grabbed my laptop, got in my car, and drove until I hit a gas station 40 miles south, sat in the parking lot with the AC blasting, trying to figure out if I was crazy for feeling like my whole future had just been ripped out from under me. That was the moment I knew I was never going to be anything more than a workhorse to Greg. Loyal, reliable, disposable. The company wasn't mine. It was never going to be mine. It was Luca's now, and I was just the guy who kept the lights on while he partied in Vegas. I don't know what exactly pushed me over the edge, but after that conversation with Greg about Luca's stake, something inside me shifted. I went home that night and stared at the ceiling until 4 in the morning. My brain was buzzing, not with rage anymore, but with clarity. I realized I had to start protecting myself. This wasn't a family business in any meaningful sense of the word anymore. It was Greg's empire, and I was just the guy he kept around because I made his job easier. And the worst part was, if anything went sideways, I'd be the one left holding the bag. So I did something I probably should have done years ago. I started quietly auditing the systems I'd built. Now, the thing about building a CRM and integrating it with the back-end accounting tools is that you end up knowing the entire flow of information. Who logs and when, which IP addresses are accessing which reports, what files get changed, and when. I'd created these fail-safes not because I didn't trust anyone, but because I'm the kind of guy who doesn't like surprises. I figured maybe I'd catch some careless spending or discover Greg had dipped into the business account a few times to fund one of his fishing trips. What I found was a hell of a lot worse. Over the course of 11 months, $186,000 had disappeared. Gone. Not through payroll, not through vendors, not through anything legitimate I could trace. Just these little withdrawals and payments spread out over dozens of transactions, all under just enough of the radar that they didn't trip any alerts. But here's the part that made my stomach drop. All the transactions were tagged with a name, K. Johnson. That's me. Or at least, it looks like me. The system was registering the activity as mine. Same user ID, same login credentials, same audit trail. But I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I hadn't moved a single dollar. I went through every one of those transactions, cross-referenced the timestamps, Locations, IP logs, everything. Half the time, the money was being withdrawn when I was in meetings, on delivery runs, or asleep. Someone had either duplicated my credentials or, worse, logged in under my name through backdoor access. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad full of notes and bank records, feeling like someone had kicked me in the chest. I wasn't just being used, I was being set up. I didn't go to Greg right away. I thought maybe I should get a lawyer first, or at least prepare some kind of defense. But part of me, the naive part that still clung to some faded version of loyalty, thought maybe, just maybe, he didn't know. Maybe if I showed him the numbers, the logs, the way everything pointed to me even though I clearly didn't do it, he'd realize someone inside the company was pulling something shady, and we could deal with it together. I was an idiot for thinking that. I waited until late Friday afternoon to bring it up. The office was quiet, most of the staff already out for the weekend. I knocked on Greg's door, heart pounding, and asked if we could talk. He waved me in like always, same easygoing smile, but it didn't last. I laid out the records, showed him the spreadsheet with the missing funds, showed him how the transactions were tagged with my user ID. Then I looked him in the eye and said, "Greg, I didn't do this. Someone's using my credentials. I don't know who or how, but this isn't me." He stared at the screen for maybe 10 seconds before closing the laptop with a slow, deliberate motion. Then he looked at me and said, "I know you were trying to cheat us." Just like that. No hesitation. No questions. No disbelief. It was like he'd already made up his mind before I walked in the room. I actually laughed for a second. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Greg, are you serious? You think I stole 186 grand? From a business I've practically run single-handed for 5 years." He didn't flinch. "You had access. You built the system. If anyone could hide it, it would be you." I told him again I didn't do it. I walked him through the logs, the times that didn't match my activity, the IPs that weren't mine. He didn't care. He sat back in his chair like a disappointed dad and said, "I always knew you wanted more than you were owed." That one hit harder than I expected. I wanted more than I was owed. After everything, after 5 years of 70-hour weeks, sleepless nights, and being paid in handshakes and vague promises, I wasn't trying to take anything. I was just trying to survive. I left his office in a daze. I didn't even grab my bag. I got in my car and just sat there, engine off, hands on the wheel, trying to process what had just happened. He thought I did it. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he just wanted me out of the way. Maybe this was part of the plan all along. Either way, I knew one thing for sure. I was in deep, and I was on my own. 2 days after that conversation with Greg, I showed up to work at the same time I always did, 7:52 a.m. sharp, coffee in hand, already running through my mental checklist of tasks for the day. I tried to badge in like always, but the card reader gave me that sharp red flash and let out a dull beep. I tried again, then a third time. Nothing. It was like I didn't exist in the system anymore. For a second I thought maybe the reader was just acting up. It had glitched before. But then I noticed the receptionist, Jenny, standing awkwardly behind the front desk, avoiding eye contact. She'd seen me come in 100 times without a word, but today she looked like she was bracing for something. I stepped closer and asked if she could buzz me in. She looked uncomfortable, then picked up the phone and whispered something I couldn't quite hear. A minute later, 2 security guys, contractors Greg used from a local firm, came around the corner and told me I needed to come with them. I didn't argue. I already knew what this was. They walked me to my office in silence. Or what used to be my office. My nameplate had been removed from the door. Inside, every trace of me had been packed into 2 cardboard boxes. My monitors were gone, my desk drawers emptied. Even my pins and charger cables coiled up neatly like I was just another terminated employee, not someone who'd been running this operation for half a decade. One of the security guys handed me a slip of paper with a list of items. "You can take your personal belongings. Everything else stays." I stood there for a minute, staring at the boxes, trying to wrap my head around how fast it had all happened. 48 hours ago, I was running reports for Greg's Monday meeting. Now I was being escorted out like a thief. I asked if Greg was in. They said he was in the conference room prepping for a staff meeting. I said I'd wait. They told me I wasn't allowed to stay on the premises. That was when it clicked. He hadn't just cut me loose. He was erasing me. I picked up the boxes and walked out past desks full of people who either didn't look up or pretended they didn't see me. Nobody said a word. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. A text from my old coworker Brandon. Just 3 words. "Dude, what happened?" That's when I checked my inbox. 20 minutes earlier, Greg had sent out a company-wide email announcing that I was no longer with the company due to internal policy violations. The phrasing was vague, professional, sterile, but the damage was in the subtext. In corporate language, that means one thing, something serious, something bad. By the time I got to my car, Brandon had sent another message. Apparently, Greg had made an announcement at the morning meeting, said I was under investigation for financial misconduct, told the team that the company had discovered irregularities in the books, and that I was fully cooperating with authorities. He ended it by thanking everyone for their continued trust in our leadership. Not one word about what I'd built. Not even a fake thank you. I drove home with my heart pounding and hands shaking. I kept checking my rearview mirror like someone might be following me, which made no sense, but that's how it felt. Like I was being watched. Like every move I made was already being written into someone else's story. When I got home, there was a letter taped to my front door. Not a regular envelope, but one of those official government ones, thin and stiff with a red stamp in the corner. I opened it right there on the porch. It was a police summons. The words blurred the first time I tried to read them. Then I made myself focus. I was being summoned to answer questions in connection to an investigation into corporate embezzlement. A formal complaint had been filed by my former employer, alleging unauthorized financial activity totaling a significant amount of company funds. It didn't use my name directly, but it didn't have to. The context made it perfectly clear. That's when the realization hit me like a gut punch. Greg hadn't just fired me. He was framing me. All the pieces started falling into place. The bogus audit trail under my name. The missing money linked to my credentials. The lack of a contract. The fact that I was never officially on payroll. All of it meant I had no legal paper trail defending my position, no clean break, no severance, nothing. Just a trail of evidence that someone had carefully laid out to make it look like I had spent the last year siphoning money from a business I'd practically built from the inside out. And Greg, of course, was already ahead of it. He was painting the picture. Loyal uncle discovers betrayal, acts swiftly, and now cooperates with law enforcement to protect the business. Meanwhile, I was left holding a letter that said I was being investigated for a crime I didn't commit. When I told my parents what had happened, I honestly expected them to be on my side. Not because we were especially close. We aren't. But because they had always taught me that doing the right thing mattered. That if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept your head down, things would eventually pay off. I thought if anyone would understand how much I'd given to that company, it would be them. Instead, I got silence. A long, heavy silence that made my stomach twist. Then my mom finally said, "Kevin, this is all just so shocking. Are you sure nothing happened? Maybe you did something and didn't notice?" Didn't notice. Like I accidentally embezzled almost $200,000 and just forgot about it. I tried to explain everything. The audit, the system access, the IP logs, the fact that the transactions happened while I wasn't even at a computer, but they just looked at me like they were waiting for me to admit something. My dad leaned forward with that disappointed dad voice and said, "Greg's always been good to you. He trusted you. If he's saying there's something wrong, then maybe there is." I told them Greg wasn't saying anything. He was accusing. Publicly. He had already fired me, sent out that company-wide statement, and dropped a police summons on my front door. This wasn't just some misunderstanding, but it was like talking to a wall. Then Josh chimed in. My younger brother, the IT guy who thinks he knows everything because he once rewired a smart thermostat and installed a NAS drive. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, arms crossed, that smirk creeping onto his face, the one he used to wear when he was 12 and trying to get me in trouble. He said, "I mean, Kev, are you sure this isn't about Luca? I know you've been working your ass off for years." And then Greg gives him a piece of the company. I'd be pissed too. I stared at him, speechless. "This isn't jealousy, Josh," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is fraud. Someone used my credentials to drain money from the company, and now I'm being blamed for it." Josh just shrugged. "I'm just saying, if you were already mad at Greg and Luca, maybe you cut a few corners. I don't know. Maybe it didn't feel like stealing at the time." I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach across the room and shake him. Ask him how he could possibly believe I would sabotage everything I'd built. But instead, I just stood up and walked out. No one stopped me. That was the last real conversation I had with them. It's strange how quickly silence fills a space where family used to be. The call stopped. The text slowed to a trickle and then disappeared completely. Even my aunt, who used to send me dumb forwarded emails and Christmas jokes every year, hasn't said a word. Greg's version of the story moved through the family like smoke through a chimney. Quiet, steady, leaving soot on everything. I thought about getting a lawyer. I even had a name, someone a friend of a friend recommended. I called his office and explained the situation. The assistant was polite but blunt. His retainer was 10 grand. I didn't even have 1,000. I'd been surviving on what little I had left in my personal checking account. After Greg cut me off, there was no severance, no final paycheck, nothing. Just the last fragments of the under-the-table money he used to pay me. I was lucky I'd paid rent early that month. But groceries were a different story. I started stretching out meals. Rice and canned beans became dinner staples. I froze leftovers, rationed coffee, stopped driving unless I had to. My fridge looked like it belonged to someone squatting in their own apartment. Half a bottle of mustard, 3 eggs, and a single bruised apple one couldn't bring myself to throw away. I tried picking up freelance gigs online, but without proper references or recent work history, no one wanted to take a chance. The few interviews I landed always fizzled when they asked for employment verification, and I had to explain I didn't have a contract. I didn't even know how to list my title anymore. Was I a customer service manager? An analyst? A ghost? The worst part wasn't the poverty or the betrayal or even the looming criminal charges. It was the isolation. The way people look through you when your name is tied to something ugly. The way friends hesitate to reply. The way your own family decides your side of the story just isn't worth the trouble. Every day I wake up and wonder how it got this far. And every night I go to sleep hoping it won't get worse in the morning. But so far it always does. After the fallout with my family and getting shut out of every possible avenue for help, I spent a few days just floating through time. No job, no real food, no direction. But one morning, around 2 a.m., I sat up in bed with this weird jolt of clarity. I remembered the server I had set up in my apartment a couple of years back. Just a personal side project where I kept system backups and raw access logs from the CRM before Greg insisted everything move to the cloud. I hadn't touched it in months, but I suddenly wondered if I could still pull something useful out of it, anything to prove I wasn't behind the theft. I booted it up and started digging. The first thing I did was locate the access logs that had been synced weekly, a precaution I'd built into the system without even thinking twice at the time. I ran a reverse trace on every login that had been recorded under my user ID during the period when the money had disappeared. It took hours, painstakingly slow because the server wasn't fast and my scripts were years out of date, but eventually I started seeing something I hadn't expected. The IP addresses didn't match mine. At least, not all of them. My own IP from home was exactly where it should have been. But tucked in between legitimate entries were a string of logins from an entirely different IP range, one I didn't recognize right away. I cross-referenced them with a geolocation tracker. The result hit me like a brick to the chest. Las Vegas, Nevada. Luca. Not just Vegas. It was Luca's condo complex. I knew because I'd once had to overnight him a corporate laptop after he left his on a plane. Same address. Same building. I sat there in front of my screen, hands clenched into fists, staring at the logs that showed my own credentials being used hundreds of miles away while I was still physically in Indianapolis. This wasn't just someone guessing my password. They had full access, my credentials, my permissions, everything. And they were smart enough to cover their tracks inside the cloud environment, but forgot that I'd kept weekly logs offsite. A relic of my own paranoia. I didn't stop there. I pulled up every transaction tied to the suspicious activity and cross-referenced those timestamps with account activity logs I'd backed up from our financial database. The logins were surgical, only appearing when transfers were being authorized or account details changed. Someone had known exactly when and where to poke. That's when I started noticing another pattern: dual logins. Every time one of these suspicious transactions took place, there was often a secondary login just before or after from a different user. P. Williams. Page. She was our internal accountant, a quiet woman who had been with the company for years. The kind of person who blended into the background, never asked questions, never drew attention. She had full financial access. She could move funds, authorize invoices, and approve vendor payments without raising a single flag. I traced her activity against Luca's access times, and sure enough, there was overlap. Her logins always happened just before the money moved. Then the actual transfers would be made using my credentials, accessing the system as me, through a Vegas IP address. It wasn't just coincidence. This was a coordinated setup. Luca had used my account. Paige had paved the way. They had been working together to funnel money through the system, using me as the fall guy while Luca stayed hidden behind the title Greg had handed him, 19 years old and a 49% owner. I backed up every log, every IP trace, every email timestamp and hash chain. I created encrypted folders and triple copied them to external drives. I even printed physical logs, line by line, and stored them in a locked drawer under my sink. Because if this went sideways, I didn't want the evidence to live in only one place. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. And now I had proof. Cold, digital, timestamped proof. I didn't sleep the night I finished compiling all the evidence. I just sat in front of my computer, going over everything again and again until my eyes burned. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Not directly. Greg had already poisoned that well, painted me as the villain. I didn't have the money for a lawyer, and I sure as hell didn't trust the company's legal team to do anything but bury the truth. But I needed this to come out. I needed someone to see what was really happening, someone with enough reach to make it matter. So I made a decision. There's a local paper here in Indianapolis called the Vibrovokhnaya Pravda. Weird name, Russian roots, but it's known for digging into city corruption, corporate abuse, all that stuff respectable outlets sometimes shy away from. They once took down a whole construction racket over zoning permits and made half the city council squirm. I figured if anyone would take this seriously, it would be them. I didn't send the files from my home IP. I used a VPN, encrypted every document 3 times over, and set up a burner email. I didn't sign it, didn't include my name, just labeled the package internal financial fraud, evidence attached. I wrote a short message. A family-owned business is hiding nearly $200,000 in embezzled funds. The owner's son and an internal accountant coordinated the theft and pinned it on an innocent employee. All logs, IP traces, and timestamps included. Please verify. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. For the next week, I checked the paper's website 10 times a day. Nothing. Not a headline. Not a whisper. I started thinking maybe they dismissed it. Or maybe Greg's influence went further than I thought. Maybe they were too afraid of a defamation suit to touch it. Then, on the 10th morning after I sent the files, there it was. Front page of the Metro section. Scandal in the family business. Owner's son under suspicion of fraud. Beneath it, a photo of Greg standing in front of the company delivery vans, arms crossed, looking proud. The headline made him look like a fool. The article didn't name me, but it didn't have to. It laid everything out in careful, precise detail. The transfers, the Vegas logins, the connection to Luca, the sudden termination of a longtime employee without formal charges. It even mentioned Paige, quietly, without accusations, but noting her access and overlap in the logs. They didn't claim guilt outright, but they didn't need to. The tone said it all. Someone had tried to cover up something serious, and someone else had receipts. Greg must have read it the second it went up, because by noon I was getting calls from a number I hadn't seen in weeks. His personal line. I didn't answer. The voicemail came through 20 minutes later. He sounded nervous, still putting on that calm uncle voice, but it was thin. Said he thought we should talk, that maybe there were misunderstandings and things got out of hand. No mention of firing me. No mention of the police summons. Just that now, maybe we could work something out as a family. I didn't call back. The next day, another voicemail. This time more urgent. Kevin, listen. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to destroy everything we built. The company can't survive this kind of attention. Then, softer. I never wanted it to come to this. You've always been like a son to me. I almost laughed when I heard that one. Like a son. That was rich coming from the man who handed his actual son nearly half the company while tossing me out like garbage. A few hours later, he texted. Just one line. Let's meet. No lawyers. Just family. I didn't answer that either. The truth was, there wasn't any family left. Not for me. That part of my life had already been shredded, and Greg had done most of the tearing. Whatever damage this article did to his reputation, his business, his golden boy Luca, it was damage he earned. I wasn't playing the loyal nephew anymore. I wasn't playing at all. The fallout from the article came faster than I expected. By the end of the week, customers started pulling out of their contracts. Some did it quietly, just stopped placing orders or returning emails, but others made a show of it, posting on social media that they wouldn't support a company involved in alleged fraud and cover-ups. A couple of longtime clients even tagged the Vibrovokhnaya Pravda article directly in their posts, urging their followers to do their research. Then one of our biggest suppliers, a logistics outfit based in Cincinnati that had worked with us for over a decade, formally terminated their contract. I saw the scan letter on a Reddit thread someone had shared. Due to reputational concerns and internal restructuring, we are ceasing our relationship with Johnson Food Distribution effective immediately. That one must have hit Greg like a sledgehammer. He used to brag about that supplier as if they were family. Apparently not anymore. By the following week, word got out that Greg had laid off nearly half of the company's staff. I recognized some of the names, people I used to sit next to, people who brought cookies into the break room or stayed late with me to fix delivery issues. People who had nothing to do with any of this. He let them go to restructure, which was just another way of saying he was bleeding out and trying to plug the holes with someone else's shirt. Meanwhile, I was still unemployed. No steady income, no savings left, and no real job prospects. But something had shifted. People started reaching out, not recruiters or companies, but regular folks. Strangers, mostly. People who had read the article or seen the story picked up on local blogs and news channels. I started getting messages on LinkedIn, Instagram, even my old email from college. Most of them said the same thing. Thank you for standing up, or you did the right thing. Some shared their own stories of being screwed over by family businesses, small-town companies, crooked bosses. A local podcast host messaged me out of the blue and asked if I wanted to come on and talk about the situation. I hesitated at first, but I figured I had nothing to lose. I showed up with my printed logs, laid out the timeline, told the story without sugarcoating it. I expected maybe a few dozen people would listen. Instead, the episode blew up. Hundreds of comments, shares, a couple of local journalists reached out afterward for follow-ups. That led to a speaking invite from a community business ethics panel at a local college. Then a feature on the nightly news, a 10-minute segment about whistleblowing from inside a family company. I stood in front of a small camera crew in my secondhand blazer, explaining how I'd been set up, framed, and fired, and how I fought back not with lawyers, but with log files and stubborn persistence. It was surreal, watching people rally behind me, especially after weeks of feeling invisible. I still didn't have a paycheck. I still skipped meals some days. But people were starting to care. They were starting to see the full picture. I was no longer just the guy who'd been accused. I was becoming the guy who'd fought back and proved it. Filing the lawsuits was both the hardest and easiest decision I've ever made. I had nothing left to lose. No job, no support system, no income, and no illusions about family loyalty. What I did have was evidence, clear, technical, time-stamped, and a whole city now watching closely. With the help of a nonprofit legal aid group that stepped in after the story went viral, I filed on 3 fronts. The first was for slander and reputational damage. Greg hadn't just fired me. He had dragged my name through the mud, told the entire company I was under investigation, implied I was a thief, and made sure that information got around. I had emails, witness statements, and even the official memo he'd sent out calling my departure a result of internal violations. That phrasing had been vague enough to protect him legally, but damaging enough to ruin my reputation. Every podcast I went on, every news interview I gave, brought new people out of the woodwork who confirmed what he'd said behind closed doors. It was deliberate. It was coordinated. And it stuck. The second front was wrongful termination. I had no contract, and Greg probably thought that meant he was protected, but that only made things worse for him. It proved I was working under a deliberately informal arrangement while handling responsibilities far above what my title ever implied. I had logs showing my hours, documents with my name all over financial models, presentations I built, even audio clips from Zoom meetings where Greg called me the engine that keeps this place running. I may not have had a W-2, but I had years of digital fingerprints that showed I was anything but a disposable freelancer. The third lawsuit was the most serious, fraud. Specifically, fraudulent use of my credentials to embezzle money from the company. That wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about showing that someone had committed a federal crime and tried to bury it by blaming me. I had the access logs from my personal server. I had timestamps proving I was nowhere near a computer during key transfers. I had IP addresses tracing back to Luca's Las Vegas apartment. And I had enough system-level documentation to show how my access credentials had been cloned, likely with help from inside the company. Greg lawyered up fast. No surprise there. He brought in a full legal team, guys with sharp suits, fake tans, and that polished arrogance that comes from billing $500 an hour. They tried everything. Claimed the data was forged. Claimed I was bitter. Claimed I was unstable, jealous, vindictive. But none of that stuck, because every accusation they threw had a spreadsheet, a server log, or a witness statement sitting right there to dismantle it. I sat across from Greg in mediation more than once, and I swear I watched the panic settle into his eyes a little deeper each time. He still tried to talk to me outside the room, tried to bring up family, asked me if this was really necessary. But I didn't flinch. I wasn't interested in handshakes or backroom apologies. I had spent too long being loyal to people who saw me as a tool, not a person. Now it was my turn to speak in a language they couldn't ignore. Paperwork, evidence, and the weight of legal consequence. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, but in the way everything felt clinical and detached. No emotion, just facts, procedure, and silence unless someone was speaking into a microphone. I sat across from Greg and his army of lawyers, their expressions tight, rehearsed. Greg avoided my eyes. He hadn't looked me in the face once since the first day of hearings. My legal team started by laying the foundation. We walked through my work history, the responsibilities I held despite having no official title, the absence of a contract, the timeline of the missing funds. But the real weight came when we started introducing the digital evidence. First came the access logs, records pulled from my personal server, showing the exact days and times that money had been transferred under my user ID. The IP traces followed. My address in Indianapolis, and then the Vegas address where Luca had been living. The courtroom projector displayed the geolocation maps side by side. blinking in different colors, showing the undeniable truth. My account had been accessed from a place I hadn't set foot in since Luca's graduation party 3 years earlier. Then came the emails. I watched the color drain from Greg's face as my attorney projected screen captures of internal messages between Luca and Paige. The tone was casual, arrogant, like they thought they were too clever to ever be caught. One message from Luca read, "Once we dump old Kev, we'll have full runway." Another one, more recent, said, "He's too busy keeping Greg's train running to notice the side tunnel we're building." Paige responded with laughing emojis and a gif of someone throwing papers in the air. The room was dead silent except for the judge turning to Greg's attorneys and asking if they'd like to respond. They didn't. We went further. Chat logs from a shared Google workspace Luca had used with Paige to coordinate file access, screenshots of spreadsheets they moved and renamed to hide duplicate payments. Even metadata showing that Luca had edited some of the files using a cloned version of my login credentials. Everything was timestamped. Everything was traceable. It was airtight. Then came the moment no one expected. Halfway through the second week of testimony, the court received word that Luca had failed to appear for a scheduled deposition. He was supposed to testify that morning. Instead, his lawyer stood alone, fidgeting with his watch. It turned out Luca had booked a one-way flight to Cancun the night before using a different last name and a prepaid credit card. What he didn't know was that authorities had already flagged his name following the fraud investigation, and a warrant was in the system. He was picked up at the airport during the boarding process, passport flagged, handcuffed before he could reach the gate. The courtroom buzzed with the news. Even the judge seemed surprised. I didn't say anything when I heard. I didn't smile. I didn't breathe a sigh of relief. I just sat still, watching Greg stare down at the table in front of him like it might open up and swallow him whole. There was nothing left for them to argue. No denials. No explanations. Just silence. When the verdict was read, I didn't feel the rush I thought I would. No adrenaline. No satisfaction. Just stillness. Like my body hadn't caught up to what I'd just heard. The judge stated clearly that I was a victim, wrongfully terminated, falsely accused, and deliberately framed as part of an internal scheme to deflect blame and preserve control within the company. Greg was ordered to pay me $250,000 in compensation. That number didn't come close to covering what I'd lost in time, trust, and mental health, but it was a public acknowledgement that what he did wasn't just wrong. It was calculated, and it came with consequences. He didn't even look at me when it was announced. He just sat there, hollow and quiet, like a man who had finally run out of defenses. Paige was sentenced to 2 years of probation. The court acknowledged her role in the fraud, but also gave weight to the fact that she cooperated fully with the investigation once it became clear she'd been used as much as she was complicit. She testified in detail, confirmed the chats, the login coordination, the payout schedules. Without her, it would have taken me twice as long to prove what had been done. I didn't feel sorry for her, but I understood the outcome. Luca's sentence hit different. 1.5 years suspended, plus a $30,000 fine. He didn't speak during sentencing. Not a word. He stood there in a rumpled blazer, his hands clenched at his sides, jaw tight. The judge made it clear that his actions were reckless and malicious, but ultimately nonviolent and eligible for suspension under state guidelines. I wanted to be angry about that, but in the end, I didn't care what he did with his sentence. He'd built his life on shortcuts, fake confidence, and someone else's infrastructure. Now everyone knew it. That was the punishment he couldn't escape. After it was over, I walked out of the courthouse alone. No cameras, no family, just the sound of traffic and my shoes hitting the sidewalk. The weight didn't lift, but at least now, I wasn't the one carrying someone else's lie. The last time I saw Greg in person was during the final hearing where the judge closed the case for good. It was procedural, mostly paperwork and official confirmations, but before we were dismissed, Greg stood up. His lawyer looked surprised. The courtroom was mostly empty by then, just a few stragglers from the press and court staff. He looked at me, not with that smug bravado he always wore, but with something like age in his eyes. Like the weight of everything had finally cracked through the surface. He cleared his throat and said, "Kevin, I was wrong. I let things happen under my roof that I should have stopped. I blamed you because it was easier than facing the truth. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to say I'm sorry. For everything." I didn't stand up. I didn't give him a long speech or ask him why it took losing everything to say those words. I just looked at him, held his gaze, and nodded once. "Too late," I said. And that was it. After the verdict, and once the dust finally settled, I took what I had left, some of the compensation money, the skills I knew better than anyone had bothered to give me credit for, and a few names of people who said, "If you ever start your own thing, let me know," and I did exactly that. I opened a small business security consulting company. It started with just me and a laptop at a shared office downtown. I helped small firms set up digital protections, fraud monitoring, and internal audit trails. Nothing flashy, just clean systems and accountability. I called it Clear Track, and I gave it a simple slogan: your business is your truth. It worked. Word of mouth picked up. Clients came in slow but steady. People respected that I wasn't just offering software. I was offering protection from the kind of betrayal that nearly broke me. They listened because I'd lived it. A year later, I got an invitation to speak at a local tech and business ethics conference. The panel was called How Family Can Hack and How to Survive. I sat on stage under bright lights, looking out at a crowd of strangers and professionals, and I told them my story. Not because I wanted revenge or pity, but because I needed to say it out loud. To show that survival is messy, lonely, and rarely heroic, but it's possible. And that sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who claim to love you. So that's where I leave it. What would you have done? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who once claimed to be on your side? Do you believe people like Greg ever really mean it when they say sorry too late? I'd love to hear your thoughts.